Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you've. Why don't you start rather than just with with reflections on the the whole process, the whole experience, the good and the bad and the indifferent.
Okay. Well, shall I start, Jill?
Yes, do.
So the first thing for me is a kind of real positive for Jill and I, for Pigeon, was that we went into it and we decided that we weren't going to do we were literally not going to do any planning at all, so that we were going to go in and just allow ourselves to be kind of taken by the experience and see where it would take us. And that happened, and I think we did that because the very first meeting we had with Paul, he talked about, I can't remember which of the projects it was, that he said that he had lots of individual solo performers who were doing something in one of his environments. Was it the one in his house? It might have been quarantine. And he said that some of them had prepared things and others hadn't. And he said that often the more interesting stuff was where nobody had prepared anything. And so I thought, well, actually, maybe that is what this space is for. It's not about necessarily making a new work. It's about research. It's about development. It's about kind of seeing what happens. So I think doing that for us was a real kind of positive. And it meant that we did certainly in the beginning try some things that were kind of out of our comfort zone, or things that were a little bit more going back to the kind of physical work that we used to do a long time ago and we haven't done for a while. So that for me was a really exciting thing. I think what happened was that as kind of we go, there's a time limit and we need to work towards something at the end, some kind of sharing. I think we did start to revert back to what was comfortable for us. So in terms of developing a text, that was the way in which we always develop, or more recently anyway, we always develop text. So in a sense, I think we did shift into slightly more comfortable modes of making as we went through. And I think had this been, a really much longer process, then I like to think that we might not have done that, but who knows, you don't know. So I think those are the two positives. I think going into it with nothing and no planning, whilst absolutely terrifying, because this kind of work is not something that either of us are necessarily comfortable with or have ever done before. I've done those bits with you, Steve, before, but that was always your project. You know what I mean? I was working as an actor in a sense for those two projects. So this was very different. This was our own work. And I would, I would have liked to have seen what would have happened had it been a much longer process. And that's what I would have tried to do had we had more time.
It was even that what you're saying there, Anna, it was still a little different because it was led by the visuals, or it was led by graphics, and we don't usually or us put in several worlds or corridors or different spaces, and that isn't really the way that we would normally approach text. We're much more text first, visuals later, and the choreography then coming from that, whereas it was a kind of a reversal of that in some sort of way. But yes, we definitely did resort to our generating of text, and which was because we had to work kind of quickly. It's kind of this piece we need some sort of framing. It needs to make sense to us. What is this space? How are we inhabiting it? And how does that text kind of link it together? How do those little worlds relate together? And the text kind of made sense of that, certainly to me in some way.
So how much? So you say you started very open and just with an empty page, and then you said you came back to revert to sort of what you'd done before. But were you using much content? Either text, speeches, or ideas and scene setting from previous works? Were you sort of importing?
No, there were the majority of it was entirely new and kind of in response to what we've been doing. So I think it's more about the process, the way of doing it that was similar. However, saying that, Steve, there were a few of Jill's longer speeches that did come from a previous piece from God knows how long, it's about 10 years ago, that never saw the light of day. So, or it did, it had one showing at Green Room, didn't it, Jill? So there was thing there that came back, but the context changed. So that piece was not about, that wasn't about, well, it was pre-children, wasn't it, Jill? So it was a long time ago.
And that particular monologue was heavily edited as well. So it was more the framework of that piece of text. And then it itself was reframed in the idea of, misunderstanding things and not getting the point. So it was the core of that text was we reused, but actually its content shifted, and even that text even shifted a bit as well.
So it was that section on articulation. So it was that speech, all of that, and
the bit before that, the text before that.
Okay. But only a small amount, say 10% or something.
10% less probably.
That's you did really well then, because there was a lot of a lot of text and a lot of great dialogue. So that's brilliant.
And most of that, I mean, this was the technique that we do, Steve, is we didn't quite do it like this, but we often spend an evening together over a bottle of wine or two, and we talk about what it is that we want to make, and we record it, and then we transcribe it, and then we work with those transcriptions to create scripts. And that's how we've made probably the last 2-3 shows, that big shows. When we were making shows, we haven't really done one for a while. So we did it this time. Were we together, Jill? We were together, but we weren't.
Yeah, we were. We had a cup of tea in your kitchen. We had a few cups of tea, and we recorded conversations about washing.
Great. That was for this show. Yeah.
That was for this show. Yeah.
And then that gets transcribed and then kind of made sense of, and then it goes through an editing process of, well, how do these things actually relate to one another? Does this make sense? And then it's a bit of to and froing, and kind of, well, that doesn't link in, and then it's reworked and adapted.
Right. And how much, in terms of the ideas, let's maybe think specifically about scenographically, because that was one of the first things. It's like, what do we create? I know you did sort of workshopping with some shapes and things, and then you came up, I remember, with a corridor, which is a big theme and so on. So how many of the kind of those ideas for scene, and obviously you had hatches and, and the Gothic windows and lots of different. Those ideas come from, I think, sorry, what I'm specifically asking is, how many did you just say, I want that just as an idea, and how much came sort of from out of the process in terms of, we got that, now let's build to that? How much was constructed based on your experience as you did it, and how much was just you as artists going, let's have X, let's have Y?
I really think, Steve, that the whole piece came from that first session that we did with the shapes. So do you remember when we just had a frame, and we were just moving in front of and behind and talking to each other through the frame, and trying to go through it. So I think in terms, and the shapes, the corridor, I think maybe we had talked about corridors before, but I think the corridor came from that. So for me, I can link it right back to that. So all of that idea of being separated in houses from other people, other human beings, through some kind of framing, came from that moment for me.
We also, as a bit of research, we watched to get our head back into making work. We watched some of those Laurie Anderson lectures that she did, and they're there's a lot of stuff going on. So I think initially perhaps we were thinking libraries and kind of big grand spaces are being kind of big as well as confined at the same time.
Because we were talking about labyrinths, and before we started, we were talking about labyrinths and libraries, and like you said, massive spaces. So what was interesting then, and when we did say to ourselves, no, we need to just let that go, and it became much smaller and tighter, because I think of that opening experience of being framed quite tightly.
But you still, through the doors, there was the opportunity to be expansive as well. So that was quite nice.
Yeah.
How did you get on with the technology? Because obviously, you know, the space is actually very defined by the space of your living room and what you can do with the kit and the equipment, and where you can put the screens and things like that. How much did that affect your creative process?
So I think the first thing to say is that Jill and I are notoriously not very good with tech. So if we can do it, then anyone can do it. And honestly, I was really, that was the thing that I was most scared about that first. And I did it the night before. It took me ages to get it up, and I was so terrified. And actually it went up. It was really straightforward. So in that sense, the tech bit was great, really exciting to feel like I was actually achieving something technically was really good. The constraints of where to put it in the room meant that actually it reflects, because I was having to do it in my front room because I wanted to be able to shut the door and shut the boys out overnight, so that they didn't, because they would just literally pull it down. So it meant it was quite tight, and actually for me that helps. So it's not only tight just within the green bit, but when I was stepping out of the green bit, I was really having to squeeze up against the side so that I couldn't be seen. And that helped, I think, possibly with the development of this idea of being stuck in the house, of being kind of confined and contained. So I think maybe it did have a kind of creative output in the end, that kind of the space that we were working in.
Yeah. It is quite odd that I was the same. It was kind of, you literally have less than a foot to try and hide, and so you'd always see me trying to duck out, or you'd get a limb. But the actual green screen space seemed actually much bigger to me. There seemed to be much more room within it, and I find that quite surprising, that you were able to kind of fill. Because I'd never worked this way before, so that to me I found very surprising, that actually there was real depth in it and width to it, which I kind of thought it was going to be incredibly tight itself. So that was quite fun to play with. It was messing around, kind of that Doctor Who, that kind of you go into something that you think's really small, but actually it's got real depth and breadth to it. So yeah.
There were some days that I found it easier to negotiate, and I think those were the days when, if I'd set up the green screen really well and it was stretched out at the sides, it meant that I could have the camera zoomed out a little bit more, which meant that I was slightly smaller. And as soon as you're smaller in the space, that for me, that was much more preferable. So in a sense, I wanted my green screen to be an extra foot width, so that I could just have that little bit extra, because whenever, I think on the final day of the performance, we were both quite big compared to, I think there was one session we had, I don't know what we both did, but we managed to be quite small, and so that was slightly harder. And of course what happened is, every time you're bigger or smaller in the overall space, everything changes. So so you've rehearsed one thing in one way and you stood in one space, but then the next time you do it and you set it up and it's slightly different, you have to be a foot back or a foot forward in order for your face to be in the right place. So I found that quite kind of difficult, but also really good to have done the sharing on a day when we had already had however many hours beforehand working, because it meant that we'd kind of familiarized with that specific set of dimensions.
And in terms of using the green screen and the whole sort of format that you're working in there, and the sort of platform structure, what did that kind of stimulate in terms of things that are new to you? Did the format and the green screen and compositing and so on, what kind of specifically new did you find in terms of your approaches, ideas, content, techniques that you use that was different from your work before?
For me, one of the most exciting bits is the bit where we do the doubling, the walking forwards and backwards. So clearly for me that felt like a very different kind of visual effect that we would never be able to do in the normal kind of work that we do. In terms of content and the feel of the piece, I think it had, for me, a feeling of kind of otherworldliness to it, which is so completely opposite to any Pigeon show that we do normally, which is about being rooted in whatever space it's in. You're in a pub and you're having a drink with somebody. That's what that show is, yeah. And there was no sense of the otherworldliness to it. So for me, that sense of a kind of fantasy world where you're not quite sure what is happening or who is who is a very different kind of content and approach to kind of thinking about theatre.
Well, also it was looking at structure from the visuals as well, and another good visual was you holding the television and the yawn. It's kind of you're putting my face in front of yours, and so you're playing. The body's merging, but actually it's coming from that an image that would be impossible for us to recreate in any other environment apart from this green screen or this kind of digital world. So those kind of initial stages of us being placed within the screen in different places forced us to be, as you said earlier, return to that kind of physical stuff that we did years and years ago. But because the technology allows you to be incredibly playful, it was those initial sessions when we were all involved, just really having fun, and then allowing those kind of images to kind of stick and kind of, oh wow, you can do this, and then okay, let's see how those images can help scenographically frame what that score, what that narrative that then is then added later to it. So there was that framework of a visual score, I think, first, yeah. Whereas as you say, Anna, it's not usually we're in a pub and then it's what text or what narrative comes first, and then choreographically what comes.
Yeah.
And
so what's it?
Sorry, Karen.
Sorry, Steve. I was going to say that I remember when we did Unheimlich, you used to talk a lot about the notions of doubling, and I think because of the fact that Jill and I have done a lot of work, which has just been the two of us, I think that sense of doubling, and also slowly our style is slowly starting to go very similar, isn't it? So we have the same glasses, we have the same hair, and I think that's happened over a number of years, but it's getting kind of closer and closer. So I think we were already playing with that sense of doubling, but in a much more concrete way. And so for me, that felt like a kind of natural thing to start thinking about who was who, which one was dominant, which one was not.
Okay. And in terms, you talked before about separation and the frames, and you were obviously separating in the TV or being outside the corridor, those kind of things. And I'm just interested in terms of, but then also you've got this sense of real togetherness and sort of communion. And I just wanted you to just reflect a little bit on kind of how that worked and how much you think. Again, the format, the scenography, and all that sort of highlights those ideas of separation, but also the idea of togetherness, of communion as well.
Well, I was surprised by how intimate it could feel. And I think that that was highlighted by those sessions that we had without any of you guys there. And Paul was at the end. Paul was kind of in the room but paying no attention and couldn't hear us. And I was just texting him whenever I needed a scene change. So I just texted him 5 or 12. And suddenly that felt, even though we were completely separate, I did feel a kind of, it felt normal, Jill, like a normal intimacy that we would normally have in a rehearsal space. So I think that was interesting. What I found then is that because of all the angles when you're in performance mode, and because you're having those chats with somebody but you're facing a green screen and can't see anything because you're looking that way and they're looking in a completely other way, that to me is quite jarring. So, and I don't know, I think it was getting easier, and I don't know what that experience is over a long period of time, whether that becomes something that becomes naturalized or whether it remains jarring throughout. So for me, there was intimacy, but it was often felt more in those moments where we were out of performance mode. So it felt much more like a performance of intimacy when we were doing that, and that might just be to do with my unfamiliarity with the structure of it.
Anna, do you think that? Sorry, just quickly, Anna, do you think that might have changed if you'd had more monitors around the space, or do you?
Yes, I do, because I did try. There was one session where I tried. Do you remember the session where nobody could hear me? That was the session that I tried with an extra, with a Chromebook on a different account going in, and because that was the only time I tried that, and it made my tech go so awful, I stopped using it again. So I didn't use it for the final show. So I think you're right, and I think remembering back to Unheimlich, and we'd certainly had many more TV screens, certainly on all sides, because I know that Paul had told us to angle ourselves in different directions. So Jill all her TV was on one side and mine was on the other, so that when we looked at each other, we could be looking at those TVs. So that did mean that there was a certain side that we always gravitated towards. So I was always on my left. So I think that would have helped. Yeah.
I just a little note on that as well. I think the nature of what we did as well, because it was quite quick and we needed to be places quickly. I think that also made that we couldn't stop and pause and kind of have those moments. Whereas in rehearsals, we can, sit and have a proper conversation with one another. Whereas because of the pace of the work and the kind of struggling to get around, I think that kind of, we just need to be cracking through it rather than enjoying it or sharing a moment together in that. That makes sense.
Yeah. And of course that was really challenging, the time lapse, in terms of when it's so text heavy and it's so much about conversational text, which overlaps naturally, doesn't it? And if you were seeing us do that text in the same room, it would go at lightning speed, but of course it wasn't. So to have to and to work living in terms of being able to try to get some sense of naturalness about it was really helpful as an acting technique, but it felt very much like it was a conscious a conscious and deliberate acting in a way that sometimes it might not be quite so much like that if we were doing it just in the same room.
Yeah.
And what are so that's a disadvantage, the lag and so on. What are the disadvantages you think there are working in this format, and what do you think are advantages?
Disadvantages would be a kind of lack of precision that's possible in a lot of the things that we wanted to do. And it might be that you need to just become very familiar with the vocabulary and know that actually you can't do these kinds of things. So like the bit where I go through the window at the end, it was just impossible for me to work out where to be. I just could not physically get my head around how I needed to get into that window properly. So it was always really bad. And again, that might be about familiarity, but for me, it was about that precision. Also, I remember early on, Steve, you saying we spent a lot of time trying to do something about passing cups to each other. And there was like these flash moments where it would work, and it was just really gorgeous. I was inside, Jill was outside. But you could never repeat it. And you said something along the lines of it is probably not worth spending all this time to get something like that to work. That's a shame. But I think you kind of just have to go, well, then this work isn't about that kind of precise visual action, and move on.
And any advantages? Anything sort of better?
The scope of things that you're able to do was just great, as kind of stimulating ideas and stuff. That it was otherworldly, and we were able to kind of let go within that. And had we more time, I think that would have got even wackier. So that was fantastic, and totally working in a different way, and trying to push it. More playtime, I think, would have been great. And you created a world that you just did want to spend time with and mess around with. I remember in those rehearsal periods, the children would come in and they're trying to kind of match up or high five and do things, and it's just an exciting space that's naturally making you want to experiment and be to be in and enjoy. So I think it was great to have an end point, because it's like, right, we need to make some decisions and work, but equally just what kind of, in a longer process, what could have, what is achievable, and what other worlds, because it's totally it opens up so many different possibilities than a typical stage show, or a lot of our work previously has been site specific, not even in a theatre space. So the kind of theatricality that it is able to create is just brilliant and incredibly exciting for us.
Yeah, I agree completely. The idea of being able to create kind of special effects and fantasy worlds, and the levels of imagination are kind of really, really up there. So that is a definite advantage. I'd also say, in terms of being able to make this work in the kind of situations that we are in at the moment, with lots of very small children, is of lockdowns and pandemics and stuff. I think that it's a really interesting and exciting way of working in relation to kind of the difficulties of childcare. So, we had so many children at various points, and we still did it. We did the books, and we had all the children were there, apart from one. So, for me, that's quite significant, and kind of quite radical as a way of working for, I'm going to say it, for women who are mothers.
It's a really good point, Steve. We need to make sure that comes out in the study.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'd be really interested to know, Anna, what Iris's take on it was.
Oh my God, she absolutely loved it. So we need to ask you guys, or maybe Paul, about how we can use this ourselves, because I think Iris would like to try out a little bit more of it. But she I think she particularly enjoyed this idea of it being a strange world that she can just plonk herself in, and she is seeing herself as something separate from her. So she has no experience of gaming or anything like that. So she has no ideas around avatars or putting it. So for her, it's her first experience, and I think she loved seeing herself be of being mirrored, wouldn't it? But she's suddenly in this world where she's not being mirrored, and so she sees herself as something completely separate. And she says she absolutely loved it.
That's good.
And she could have done it for her. She could have done it.
Oh, bless her. I mean, certainly, I think the idea behind all of this is that it should be something that people can then do on their own. So we might need to actually just get you set up with Paul for a tutorial or something on how to get started. What do you think, Steve?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, part of the aim of the project is to enable access. I mean, I know you received the green screens and camera and all that kind of thing, but I think that, you know, partly it's also saying, well, you can also go and for relatively little cost get a big piece of green cloth and actually work this yourselves. It's sort of easier said than done, and obviously Paul is operating a lot of equipment, and there's all the sort of connecting and using the software, the vMix software and all of that. But it's not beyond anyone to actually go, okay, well, I will kind of learn a bit about that software. You know, you do there are online tutorials and all that. You just learn a bit, set up the gear, and you're on. You can do it. Yeah. Yeah. So that is, you know, it's part of
amazing.
that we said for the project, that it is scalable. You know, that sort of anyone can do it with. Obviously, you need a computer, you need some basic equipment and so on. And to get a good green screen chroma key, you also need, you know, a light or two. You know, but other than that, it is, you know, it is possible. There's work involved, but it's possible. Yeah.
And you guys have got all that stuff, and you know how to set up all the end stuff. So you just need to know the linking stuff. So yeah, definitely when Paul's back, we should you know get you guys to just have a chat and see, you know, what you need, and I'm sure Paul will be able to talk you through it.
That'd be fantastic. That would be great. Yeah.
So I mean, certainly that's a real thing for our case study. The fact that you want to continue working with it, that's lovely for us to be able to put in the case study. And you're not the first.
Oh God, yeah.
As well. So yeah.
Good.
So in terms of in terms of this sort of format as a kind of future thing, you're saying you would like to produce another piece. You know, using this, is that's right, is it, or is it more to play?
I think so. I mean, I just really
wanted to spend a bit more time there. I don't.
Yeah, and I kind of really like what we made. You know, I think
it was great. It was
for the time frame. It was pretty. You know, it needed a fair bit of, I don't know.
It needs work.
But a load of work. Very ambitious.
Yeah. Kind of realised that last week. Trying to learn my planes.
Yeah, we were both a bit exhausted afterwards. It was like, wow, it makes you really work. I don't think you know, just knowing where you are, knowing where the other person is, or you know, trying not to be, you know, it was very demanding in a way. I don't think fully prepared for when we went into it. It was,
It's interesting because I think that the time that you can do it for, I mean, especially when we had one of the sessions that went on beyond the 2 hours, so when we did like a 3 or 3.5 hour session, it was as though we had spent a 9-hour session in a studio. That's how it felt. So and I know people are experiencing that in terms of teaching, and students are saying that they need more breaks during the online learning than they do. So it is much more exhausting, and like Jill says, for all those reasons.
Okay. And I just wanted to kind of reflect in terms of what it was you did in terms of, or kind of, it's theatre in a sense, but how would you describe it? Obviously, it's kind of working through a screen medium, so it's, you know, it's something else. In terms of as performers and as an experience, what do you think it is? Or sorry, I'm not trying to put any words in your mouth. Was it theatre? Was it something different? What was it? What is this?
Or what wasn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know what? It did feel like theatre to me, in terms of there's a frame, there's an audience, there's a contract, even though between us and them, even though we can't hear or see them and they can both hear and see us. So for me, it did feel like a kind of kind of isolated theatre experience. So it's doing it into a void, but it did feel like theatre.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what we called when we wrote that little blurb. We just called it Pigeon Theatre's new online theatre? I think we used the word theatre.
Yeah, and digital stage, I think, was used as well, but it was live digital stage. Yeah.
Yeah.
It absolutely felt.
Like, it does.
Sorry,
Jill, go on.
No, it absolutely felt. It felt like it did feel like a performance. Just a very unusual performance, because it's in your front room and you're desperately hoping the guy from Amazon or someone who doesn't knock on your door and kind of go hello, the window cleaner, kind of turn up. So the anxieties that you have, before the curtain goes up in a theatre space are, they're just slightly different. You've just got different levels of anxiety before that, and then you kind of know, okay, so the window cleaner does turn up. That's going to add to it. So you're just kind of,
the fear is the same, isn't it, Jill, in terms of having that sense of stage fright that both of us have, particularly me, before a live show. It was just the same. I had exactly the same thought that I had before any show, which is, why on earth am I doing this? I'm an idiot. This is the worst that I've ever felt. Why do I put myself through it? And then I'll do it again. So I still had that feeling.
Yeah, particularly so. And it was really ramped up when it was, right, okay, don't make any noise now. You are live, so you can't make any noise in your space. And then it was like, whoa, okay, right, yes, we really are. The curtain's about to go up. We are on stage now, and that felt, quite exhilarating in the way that it does when you're in a live studio space or a live theatre.
One thing that I found strange was that when, do you remember when Paul was talking about trying to do it so that Jill and I wouldn't be able to hear you speak, Steve?
Yeah.
And we were saying maybe try and get it so that your voice doesn't come through to us. Well, I kind of slightly panicked at that point, because I really wanted to hear both your voices. I think it's because we know that there is no audience feedback. So I needed to know that there was somebody there that I could hear that wasn't just Jill. So I was really glad that it didn't work and that I could carry on hearing you.
Yes.
Even when you two were having that discussion during one of my speeches, and I was going, oh my God, I can't play. But even now, I was happy to have you in my ear.
Yeah. And I remember we'd experimented with that in another show, Anna, and you'd said in the Twice Removed, when I was in your ear.
Oh yeah.
So there was a similar in a previous show. It was Anna's kind of solo performance. It was just in a studio space. So she was at the front of the stage, but I was at the back of the stage on a desk, and she had an in-ear monitor, and I was speaking to her the script or things. So it kind of, and you'd made that comment that Steve's almost that person, me at the back of the stage, kind of feeding the lines and feeding the pace of the thing. So that was a really nice little echo
going back. Yeah.
Good. Do you have any more questions, Peter?
No, I think that's covered everything that we need to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fantastic.
Any final reflections or thoughts?
Well, this has been possibly the best way that the two of us could get back into making work, because we've been literally, we spent the entire of lockdown in our own homes on our own with children on leave. So we weren't working, we weren't doing anything. We have not seen people. It's just, and we haven't, before that, we hadn't made an awful lot of work, and it had got to the point where I think we were both thinking Pigeon might not make work again. So it, honestly, I just can't say how it has really just excited us and made us feel like we're kind of creatively alive again. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And
it was brilliant.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Sorry, Tom.
Can I just ask a quick question? Although whilst you're performing, you've got no feedback, no audience interaction there. Since the live performance, have you had feedback from people, and if so, what have they said?
Jill, you've had a bit, haven't you?
I've had a bit. I've a work colleague of mine who really enjoyed it, and she was talking about how she couldn't get over the fact that we weren't on the same green screen in the same space, because she felt that we managed to achieve an intimacy that she was just quite astonished that there was that distance there. So the time lag for her, and the kind of she is familiar with our work, but she felt that the conversations, that there wasn't too much of a lag for her, that she did feel as though that we managed to achieve something of that closeness that she has previously encountered, and she was very complimentary about it, and she's just like, there's room for something bigger to develop with us in working in this way, and obviously she said yes, it wasn't as polished as but we didn't frame it as a fight. We didn't frame it as a as that, but she just said the amount of scope and the possibilities that it allows you to do is just, and she thought it was a really good medium for us to be making work in. And yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, Tom, first, if you can, let me have the recording, because I'm doing all the write-up. So I'll be writing up the project for the website and all that. If anything else occurs to you and you say, oh, I meant to say that, or just any nice reflections, because I will put those into the to the write-up, then please just drop me a line on email if you think of anything for anything further or whatever. That's great.
Thank you very much. It's been so lovely to work with you both.
It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Well done.
Thanks for the invitation.
No, it's been fantastic. You really, kind of, you're a standout group in the ambition, the creativity, the sheer brilliance. Really good.
It really has kick-started us, and I think that we kind of needed that as well. Yeah. And it's offered us different ways of approaching work, which is always exciting. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and yeah, brilliant. And if I ever make it to the UK, which will be soon, we'll have a drink in Manchester.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
great. Yeah. Cool. All right, yeah. And
I'll see you soon.
Lovely. Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Tom.
And you. Thank you. Well done.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks ever so. See you soon. Congratulations. Bye. It was brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if you just if you can send the recording through, that'd be really, really great, and I'll transcribe it and everything. Well, not the whole thing. I'll take what I need. Thanks a lot. See you later. Cheers.
All the best.
Bye-bye.